They'll turn on.
There.
Yeah.
Okay. So we leave it on?
All right, we'll try.
I don't know.
I'm going to ask
We'll
them.
find out. I think my mic's also one of the different ones.
Yours is being
I
beat
don't
up.
And how long is this session?
Okay, it's fine. All right, everybody. All right, everybody. Oh, wow, that's loud. All right. I hope everyone's doing well and everyone had a good lunch. We're really excited about this afternoon because this afternoon is really going to be a series of discussions as we go through, and it's the different pieces of putting together a nuclear energy project, and it's different pieces that we thought would be helpful for all of you to understand, and understand kind of the processes. When we came up with this, we really thought that the ideas of nuclear fuel, which has been in the news a lot recently, the supply chain issues, which you've heard most of the speakers actually talk about today, and then understanding the various industrial applications and how you can use nuclear was important for us to discuss. The other thing that we wanted to really focus on was, at ECA, we actually try and talk about getting a project done. We're talking about policies and those types of things, and policies help implement things going forward, but when you're at the local level and you're either an elected official or an economic development person or a project manager, you're actually trying to see these projects get completed, and you're not just doing this for any reason at all. So a lot of what we're going to talk about is how do we get to that next step as we go forward. So I know we're not here to listen to me, so I'm going to stop there. Steve Comello and I are the ones that are going to be facilitating. We're co-facilitating. He's all the way at the other end. It's not because we don't like each other. It's to make sure all the panelists get to play a little bit of tennis or watch tennis going back and forth as we work on this. So Steve, he plays a lot of roles in the nuclear world and different things that we work on. First, he's the Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at the EFI Foundation, and he's also the Deputy Director of the Energy Futures Finance Forum. But what I like to really say is Steve gets it. Steve understands how projects get done. He's always looking at it. He's looking at financing projects. He's looking at the realities of getting a project from the beginning to the end. And so that's why we like working with Steve and the EFI Foundation, who we've partnered with many times. So with that, we're your facilitators, but that also means once again, I use Socratic method, so I might call on some of you to ask questions. But please, if you have any questions, please come up. Our first speaker, Dr. Monica Regalbuto, she's the Director of Nuclear Fuel Cycle Strategy at the Idaho National Laboratory. When I think the first time I got to meet you, you were Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy. She's someone who brought a lot of energy, no pun intended, actually, to the job, because she's someone who understands the issues both from a technical and a policy level as we move forward. So, Dr. Regalbuto, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. So, let me go to this side. And is this on? Yep. Oh, perfect. First of all, it's truly a pleasure to be here in the Tri-Cities. I have great memories of working with the community and working with many of you in the past, either through NE or environmental management, and now through my role at INL. So really happy to be here and have the opportunity to chat with you. So as Seth said, we're going to be looking now, we talk about reactors and all these different designs and so on. But we're going to look a little bit at the supply chain, right? So things obviously don't work in isolation. So there are steps before reactors, after reactors. And what I would like to highlight to kickstart our discussion is some opportunities and some challenges. But as we all know, every challenge is an opportunity in the making. So, oops, going back the wrong way. Doing a Christine here. So you heard Mike Goff this morning talk about the need to increase a nuclear footprint in order to meet our carbon emission goals by 2050. And this is actually the report that he was talking about. So it's called A Pathway to Commercial Liftoff, and Chad over there actually was one of the people who helped author those reports. So you have a lot of people here that you can discuss these things. But bottom line on this slide is we need to triple the amount of gigawatts or electricity produced by nuclear by 2050, which is 300. And that's the report that has all those details and the different metrics that Mike was talking about. So how are we going to do that? I don't know exactly how, but I can tell you what it needs to be. And that is, it has to be a sustainable energy system. We are working in a different environment than we did back in the 70s or late 60s, 70s, 80s, where the economics rule, right? So now we actually do is what we call sustainable energy systems, and that applies to everything, not just nuclear. It applies to oil and gas, carbon captures, all of the above. And I think somebody was mentioning the conversation. One thing they learned is, it was the Energy Alliance. You have to compare technologies to technologies in the impact of all those three dimensions. So the three dimensions are the economics, right? There are the social, and of course, the environmental. And so all three need to be in harmony, and a sustainable energy system is the one that works at the intersection of all of those three pieces. And why do we do that? Well, because we clearly want to be energy competitive, but we also want to increase our public and our investors' confidence into what we are doing. So keep that in mind as we walk through the rest of the presentation. So a little bit in more detail of what is the forecast of these advanced reactors or regular reactors, right, that we're looking at. So this is a busy chart, but I really like it. If you look at the first wave in that chart, the dark blue is the US, the light blue is the rest of the world, the complete world. And then on the dark gray, that's us projections, and the light gray is the world's projections. And so that projection was done with the need to decarbonize ourselves and also the world by 2050. And, it's a combination of multiple energy sources, and that is the amount of footprint that is needed to come from nuclear in order for us to meet those targets. So when we talk about how many reactors, how many gigawatts, those are the predictions. There are different scenarios that you can use, but it's not going to change too much from that. So a couple of things to look at, right? So at the beginning, and you look up to like about 1992, we weren't building too many reactors. Mike Goff talked about the new Vogels coming up online and making up 96, he said, or 94? 94. And so you're seeing that. That doesn't mean that nuclear was like completely dormant for the period in the 2000s. What happened was that those light water reactors, which are the commercial reactors, we kept on making them more and more efficient. So every time we made those reactors more efficient, like let's say you make 4 reactors more efficient, it was the equivalent of adding 1 more reactor to the grid. So it's not like nuclear went away, it's nuclear became even better and better and better. So now we're at the point that we can no longer improve what we have because we've already done that, and we need to deploy new, right? So in those projections, that is where those projections come from. That's where those analysis that Mike was referring to. So what is the new fleet going to look like? Well, it's going to look a little bit different than what we had before, because the previous generation of reactors, the majority of them were the large light water reactors. Those were meant to really power highly dense populations in big cities, right? So you put those reactors closer to the big cities, and that is why there's many more nuclear reactors towards the east of the United States, where the density of population is much higher. And so those are the traditional. An AP 1000, for example, is also an advanced reactor. and that is considered part of the nuclear renaissance. As Mike said, if you want to buy one, you can buy one tomorrow, right? But that is maybe too big for some people. So the next generation of reactors come in different sizes, and these categories are kind of loose. Some countries use a little bit different, right? But we kind of define anything between 300 to 1,000 as a large, and then 20 to 300 is a small, and then there's micro reactors 1 to 20, and I know Everett is here, so he can talk a little bit more about that. But what really drives these reactors are a couple of things. They're not only being used for electricity production. So you see on the right-hand side, the applications are beyond just generating electrons to put on the grid. And that's important because that has opened other markets. And I know there is a panel after us that we're going to be discussing the different applications of nuclear. So nuclear is not just turn on the lights, is the heat, is desalination, is hydrogen production, is simply a number of other things, different sizes, different shapes, different forms. So that's new nuclear. And then what about demonstrations? Okay, where are we today? This is just a quickly snapshot. It does not have any new agreements that you guys are working on. So I know the previous panel talked about some agreements in the Tri-Cities. So if you all get in agreement, you make it to the chart and you make it to the map. So, finish that up quickly and I will add you to the slide, okay, before I leave. So in no particular order, I'm going to start with Idaho National Laboratory, where I come from. And on the right-hand side, on the little column over there, you see some of those reactors that are being tested. Marble is a Department of Energy reactor. That doesn't generate electricity, it just exercises the regulatory and all the system that we need to exercise, okay? Project Pele is a Department of Defense joint venture with BWXT, and that is for defense application. Basically, the goal of that reactor is to displace diesel trucks in the battlefield. So one reactor to support the needs of the military without having to truck diesel and exposing the soldiers into areas that we don't want them to be. And then there's Aurora, so that's Oklo. So that's, I will let Everett discuss that one with you. McCree is a molten salt reactor experiment. That's with Southern and TerraPower. And then in no particular order, if we go east, you got Wyoming with Natrium. You heard X-Energy discuss about their work that they're doing with Dow Chemicals, so that is the XE100. And then you have the next molten salt reactor, that is Abilene Christian University, Everett, and that is in Texas. And then there is USNC joined with the University of Illinois, and that is at Urbana-Champaign in Illinois. And then you have the two Kairos, where is Hermes the test, and then Hermes the reactor in there. So you can see that some of these are already happening, right? But of course we need more because these are tests, smaller scale. We do have 2 experimental facilities at INL, that is Dome and Lotus, and that's where people can come and test their concepts. So there's momentum going, right? But we need more. So let's talk about how do we enable this deployment. So now is where we get into one of the challenges, but also has an opportunity. So the current fuel cycle in the United States, and that means all the steps necessary to operate nuclear power. So it starts with mining, right? That's when we go and get the ore from the ground, and we convert that to yellow cake. And then the yellow cake has to be converted into a different form that is suitable for us to feed to the enrichment cascades. And that is a UF6. So you have a conversion step, and then you get your UF6, you feed that to the centrifuges, and the centrifuges have one mission and one mission only, and that is to concentrate the U-235 that is in the uranium, natural uranium, and get it up to the enrichment that you need for your reactor operation. So in the case of light water reactors, it's about 5%. And then that goes into the conversion and fuel fabrication, and you heard Framatome, and they will discuss that too here at the previous panel and in this panel. And then it goes into the reactor, and then in an LWR, It sits about 18 to 24 months, and then every, roughly 18 to 24 months, they take about 1/3 of the core out, put it in the pool to cool between 3 and 5 years, and then once it's cooled, it goes into storage at the reactor site. What the Department of Energy is having an approach is that consolidating interim storage. That means that fuel will be moved out of the power plants into a centralized facility, and it will be there for storage for a period of time, and then it goes to disposal, which is a deep geological repository. And for those of you who are familiar with the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico, is basically a system like that, different design for the specific fuel, but that is called a deep geological repository. So those are all the steps that we need to operate nuclear energy systems, no matter where you live, right? No matter what location, as a country, we have to have these capabilities. So now you look at those percentages on the top, and that's not a pretty picture. Because when we first started, and I show you that chart where all the reactors were coming online, 100% of the uranium that we load on the reactors came from US origin, meaning domestic. Today is less than 10%. So we lost that market, okay? We didn't lose that market because we ran out of uranium. We lost that market because the economics drove it to go and do something else. So where does that uranium come from? It's being imported. And we talk about energy security as national security. This is very weak for us in terms of national security. And you see those numbers. And so I have listed in the bottom of the little chart in there the countries that we import uranium in order to feed our current fleet, which generates 20% of the electricity. And in some states, it's almost 100%, right? So you see conversion is less than 15, and then you have enrichment is less than 35, and that is domestic. And then on the back end, we haven't really gotten started, so we're working towards that. We were very close with Yucca Mountain, but that went away, so we're back to zero on the last two. So those are really challenges, but they're also real opportunities. So if you look on the front end of the fuel cycle, which is before the reactor, back end is after the reactor. We're very clever with our nomenclatures, okay? So if you look at that, you see there's Russia on, bold letters on the front. And that's what Mike Goff was talking about, and that was our congresswoman from, in the opening remarks was also talking about, and that is the uranium ban. So that market has to be replaced by something, and that's where the $2.72 billion are coming for in terms of investments. That's what will bring us more into our national security, right? So those, you can see the connections of what Mike is talking about, the Congresswoman was talking about, and what is tangible to people like you, right? We need to build new capacity. That's what it says. And that is for today's market. That's not even advanced reactors. That is today's LEU market. So when we move from LEU to advanced reactors, what happens? So, well, two things change, right? The front end, which is mining and conversion, is still the same. So what starts changing is enrichment, because now we're going to go not only to 5%, we're going to go all the way to 20, okay? The machines are the same, but we have to operate under different characteristics that requires different safeguards and security, and they cost a little more money, right? And also the fuel fabrication is going to change, and you're going to hear Framatome talk about that, because not only is uranium oxide now, is TRISO, is liquid reactors, and so on. So those are the changes. Now, if you want to take a number with you today, the LEU market, the advanced reactor or HALEU market compared to the LEU market, by 2050 is about 10%. So the HALEU market is way, way smaller than the LEU market. So when we build capacity for LEU, we're actually also building capacity for advanced reactors, which is HALEU, okay? So HALEU production, real quick, because I know we're running out of time here. You know, right now we do not have any place that you can commercially go buy high-S LEU. The Department of Energy did fund a demonstration with Centrus. Centrus is the only facility in the United States that has an NRC license for production of HALEU, and that is 900 kg per year. And they are in the purpose of operating and running gas in there. Then what else do we do? Well, we actually do reprocessing. We recover HEU from Savannah River and Idaho National Laboratory. These are DOE owned materials. And so we recover the HEU, we downblend that to HALEU to make some available in the market. But these are all Band-Aids, right? The real way to do this is you have to have enough enrichment capability to overcome that 35% that I was showing you. And, you have your Renco that is in the process of expanding, and obviously Centrus also wants to expand. So with that, here's a little summary of where we are today. It seems sometimes that the Department of Energy moves slow, but we really don't move that slow. This is 7 years. So it's gone pretty quickly, if you ask me. So about 6 years ago, that's when Centrus contract came in. That was the first attempt, and I think it was NEI had that letter that identified those weaknesses, and never used to be there before. And so there was a contract through Centrus to try to prime the pump, if you want to think of it that way. And then the Energy Act came in 2020, and think about it, this is during COVID too, right? So the Energy Act authorized to make small quantities of HALEU available for research and development. We at INL started giving away some materials to folks that needed HALEU to do fuel qualification studies, for example. And then we have the Inflation Reduction Act that really was the first tangible effort to give us money to do this, and it was not just legislation. And then after that, that morphed into the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, which actually expanded the authorization of the Department of Energy to partner with industry, and then start a supply of not just HALEU, but LEU, because by then the invasion of the Ukraine had happened. And then that brings us to today, where the $2.72 billion are available anytime. It's already being approved by Congress. It's got to get the signature of the president. But that money will be what we will be using in that front end that I was showing you in the fuel cycle. So it's not just talk, it's actually tangible and real now, right? And so, of course, what about the back end? And there are panels tomorrow that are going to be discussing the back end, consolidated storage and disposal. But I just don't want you to walk away with the fact that we're ignoring that. We are not. The reality is that with Yucca Mountain no longer being a viable solution for the time being, it has opened the doors to new dialogues and new discussions, and actually an opportunity to reinvigorate our program. We are the only working repository in the world, and that is WIP. And we don't take enough credit for the waste isolation pilot plant and the work that we do. I always tell people good things happen to those who have repositories, because EM wouldn't have been able to close 23 sites if we have not had the waste isolation pilot plant. So imagine what nuclear energy in the commercial side could do if you had a repository for spent fuel. So last item here is proliferation risk, okay? I know people throw at us proliferation of nuclear all the time, but I will tell you that we have an incredibly qualified workforce that works on proliferation risk reduction every single day. Anywhere from our union workers all the way to policymakers in Washington, D.C. We are the top of the class when it comes to proliferation risk reduction, and the same way we address safety in every single thing that we do in nuclear, we address proliferation risk in everything we do nuclear. Actually, it's a pretty good time for us on proliferation risk reduction because there are new tools that can augment what we currently have. And you see my robot learning, well, those are the aids that we have for inspectors, and also to have new tools, new ability to do interrogation, new algorithms, you name it, that we have continued to evolve and expand the tool set that we have for addressing proliferation risk. So that's all I have for today. So we're gonna, let the guys start the conversation here.
Great, thanks, Monica. I'm just going to introduce the speakers real quickly. The person who's been explaining nuclear energy issues to me for the last 15 or 20 years, Dr. Everett Redmond. He's the Senior Director of Fuel Supplies at Oklo's microreactor developer. We've got Bob Freeman, who's the Chief Growth Officer for Fuel at Framatome, and we talked a little bit about some of the fuel issues yesterday. And ECA board member, also Piketon Village Council member, Jennifer Chandler from Piketon, Ohio. Steve?
Yeah, thank you so much. Is this on? Everyone can hear me? Great. Monica, thank you so very much for that comprehensive, quick presentation as well. So the Russian ban, or the ban on Russian fuel, basically has created a 24% hole in the domestic supply for uranium for fuel in the U.S. Nuclear fleet. So we have many different growth opportunities here. We have to fill that hole. We also need to develop domestic capacity in HALEU. And we also have different kinds of fuel forms. It's not just going to be the rods, as we're familiar with. There are different forms of fuel as well. So there's a tremendous opportunity in both enrichment and fuel fabrication. So I'm going to actually start with Bob. How do you see, especially given what's happened 2 weeks ago, what is the growth opportunity that you see in specific states? And then what would you consider an ideal setting for a fuel fabrication facility?
Okay, the growth has been talked about for all day. Dr. Goff gave an excellent example, and Monica just filled in any of the blanks that were associated with how each of those move forward. But an ideal fuel fabrication site, in my opinion, is an existing site. Why would I say from an existing site? Well, first is they're licensed. It took us a long time to get a license. It takes a long time to get a license from greenfield. Converting an existing site to add an operation is 5 to 7 years more advanced than going to a greenfield, applying, doing your environmental assessment, doing all your impact assessments, getting the license, getting it reviewed. So number one, for speed, an existing site is preferable. It gives you certainty. Next would be if you have a good community standing of that site. That would give you reliability, that the community is not going to turn on you or you're not going to have difficulty staffing. Next would be that you currently have a revenue generating site. It's a little hard to start up when you don't have revenue coming in to cover the costs or the upsets of expansion, and that would basically be the sustainability. If you have revenue coming in and you're growing, that's a little easier than if you're just starting from scratch and hoping that investors keep having the faith that it's going to happen. And execution. You need to have a skilled labor force, and Nick talked about that a little bit earlier. You have to have people that are universities that are going to support and feed that site. We have found that to attract people, we had a fuel factory in Lynchburg, Virginia. We have a fuel factory in Richland, Washington. Folks in those regions don't like to move. They like their regions and they stay. They go off to college. They might run around the country for a little while, but then they come back. So it helps if you have an infrastructure that surrounds it. So an existing site tends to have that type of infrastructure, a feeder system for labor on top of it. So that gives you the execution piece. So in summary, I would say that it's a lot easier. It's not impossible to start from greenfield, but there's a lot more uncertainty, a lot more costs, a lot more risks than an existing site in good standing with an infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. And Jennifer and Everett, can you reflect upon given that answer, reflect upon the work that's happening at Piketon?
Yeah.
Starting with Jennifer, please.
Maybe. That's not on.
It's already on.
It is on? Okay.
Green light.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Green light, go. Okay, so, in Piketon, we have been enriching uranium since the beginning of the project, the beginning of the Manhattan Project. 1952 is when they constructed the enrichment plant in Piketon. But, that has shut down. We're in a big cleanup program. But one section of the site has remained, and that is the Centris facility. So we have, the technology to do HALEU and LEU. We have the facilities are already constructed. We have the infrastructure in place. We have the regulatory in place. Now, because of the nature of some of the sites that are here, some of the communities that are here can relate to this. If you're in the EM program, you're kind of working yourself out of a job. If you're fortunate to have a national lab, you've got, you'll have a continued presence. Piketon does not have a national lab. So we have kind of been in flux for a little while, and a lot of the resources that we have been going kind of focused on the EM, on the cleanup projects, so tearing buildings down, infrastructure like water and sewer and those kinds of things are going to be decommissioned. So, we've been preparing for that. Workforce is another area where, we have the skilled workers. They've transitioned a lot of those folks, hired and nobody leaves. So they're hired in large groups, and for larger projects, they work until they retire. So we do have a lot of folks that are retiring, and the new people coming in, they're more on your cleanup side. So we've had in the community, we've been preparing for that workforce feeder system that we honestly didn't have. And so we now have a community college that has put in a center at Piketon. They're going to be putting out workforce with associates in science degrees. And why is that? Well, because that's what Centris is hiring for to enrich the uranium using the centrifuge technology. So we're starting to see some of that activity, and we're preparing for that. So here, we've been hoping for a while. We've known that there's been an issue with the domestic supply of enriched uranium. We didn't, of course, local governments, we're busy filling potholes and, replacing the swing sets at the park and stuff like that. So, and no one that in local government at Piketon, are nuclear physicists or anything like that. But we track the opportunities, and we are, of course, hope for the best, and then we prepare for what's to come. So ideally, we're going to be ready when things do start to ramp up, which it sounds like they might with some of the recent actions. It's going to get real because the uranium that is being used is from Russia, right? And Centris relies a lot on that for their revenue stream, and so the cost of ramping up and those things are going to be affected by that ban. So we're not really sure how this is all going to turn out, but at least in Piketon, we're going to prepare for it. So we're ready to support.
Thank you.
Okay,
Everett,
thank
please.
you. Everett Redmond with Oklo. So we're an advanced reactor developer. I'll talk more about our technology this afternoon in the Meet the Player session. We do have an MOU with Southern Ohio Diversification Initiative to potentially deploy 2 of our reactors, 15 megawatt electric each, at the Piketon facility down there, and then another MOU with them in terms of a right of first refusal for some land. We also have an MOU with Centris. They're related to HALEU. So as everybody's talked about, high assay low enriched uranium is vitally important to us as well as the majority of the non-water cooled advanced reactor developers. So we need HALEU up to close to 20%. And we have an MOU with Centris potentially to get material from them, as well as to potentially provide them power from the reactors there. So we look at Piketon as an example of an existing site that, while it doesn't have fuel fabrication currently, as Bob talked about for an existing site, it does have a lot of great infrastructure there. We, by the way, have not made any decisions as to where we're going to deploy fuel fabrication, other than to say that our first fuel fabrication is going to be done at Idaho National Laboratory. laboratory. We're working on that right now at the Materials and Fuels Complex using some of the old EBR2 fuel that Monica talked about that's being converted to HALEU. So we're actually using recycled, reprocessed material for our first core. And I can talk more about that a little bit later too. Thank you.
Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, there we go. Gotta remember the mic. All right. So Monica, when one of the scariest hearings I think I ever heard was when Dr. Huff was testifying, and it was right after the war started with Ukraine and Russia, and she started talking about how we get a lot of our fuel from Russia. And then when I look at all the SMR developers and what's going on, what I've been told is that there's a lot of different fuels that are going to be needed depending on what's there. How are you seeing it from a national perspective, to be able to address all the different types of fuels that are out there? And then, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about when it comes to that? If a SMR developer is coming to our community and saying, I want to do this, where do we think that they're going to get their fuels?
Yeah, so traditionally, the commodity was UF6, which is what is coming out of the centrifuges, and then the fuel fabricators would purchase that, and they will have what we call the deconversion, basically going from UF6 into either metal or oxide at their facilities. That was more the model that was used for the commercial LWRs, so that's a uranium oxide fuel. The new reactors have different characteristics, and some use recycled material like Everett, some use virgin stocks. So we're really looking at two commodities coming out. It's still UF6 coming out of the centrifuges, but then you have to have an oxide line, and then you have to have a metal line, because some are metal fuels, some are oxide, and then that's used to do whatever other fuel you're going to need. So places like Framatome will offer services to make the fuel, but some reactor developers choose to make their own fuel themselves, right? So it depends on who's moving to town, it will be the answer, right? But you still would need to have the ability to go from 20% enriched, if that is your reactor design, UF6, all the way to fuel. So all those steps need to be included in that dialogue. Some advanced reactor concepts do not use highly enriched uranium. So those can use the traditional, right now, fuel cycle supply chain. There's a few of them, but not all of them use 15, some use 15%, some use 1975, but some are LEU. So those are the ones that can currently use what we have.
Great, thank you.
And Everett?
Yeah, if I may add for just a second there. So there's a common theme among all reactor companies for that matter, and that's uranium hexafluoride. Mm-hmm. So we all need the UF6. Then, as Monica said, it either goes into an oxide form or a metal form. Oklo needs metal, as do a few other companies. Many need oxide. And then it'll go, for example, into TRISO fuel. Now, when you say TRISO fuel, and Ben Reinke from X-Energy, they need TRISO fuel. So the basic particles may be the same, but the companies that use TRISO, it'll be a different shape, for example, in a different form. So TRISO is not a unanimous, everybody uses the same. It's the same concept, but the fuel form is going to be a little bit different. Just like we use metallic fuel, but our metallic fuel is going to be a little bit different than the other companies that use metallic fuel. So as you go further closer to the reactor, it begins to differentiate into each company has its own fuel design. They may team up with somebody like Framatome for manufacturing, but at the end of the day, each company has its own fuel design. So just wanted to draw that distinction there.
And there's value to that. There's value to that diversification as you go beyond the standard, beyond the specification. Because if you think about it, if there wasn't, then it would be vanilla, vanilla, vanilla for everybody, and why would you choose one company over another, and why would a company innovate? So when you get to that point where you have your call it your feedstock, or your standard, or your specification for those 2 or 3 things, at that point, you want it to branch out. You want innovation coming from every angle of this world and feeding into that growth and expansion of nuclear. So as a fuel fabricator, we're not against that. We think it's fantastic. I'd use the simple evaluation of like a 2x4. Imagine if a 2x4 didn't have a specification. Every one of them was a little bit different dimensions. You couldn't build anything. But because you can expect it to be a certain number of inches in one direction or another direction, architects and designers can do anything with it. So we want to just get the basics up to a level and then let the world explode with creative ideas. And we know it's possible because if you go back, we started off with metal fuels, then we went to certain ceramics and cladding, then we went from, the Navy went one direction with metals, the industry went with ceramics. We already started doing this, and it drives material science, and it drives innovation in fuel designs.
If I may add one thing. Another thing to remember here is that the market for nuclear energy systems has expanded. And that's why we also have different fuels, right? Because some reactors, we want them to go to very high temperatures, and that is for a different application, not just necessary electricity production. And you will hear that on the next panel. So those that have a higher output, those are being used for industrial heat, replacing furnaces, for example. So the applications are also driving the different type of fuels because we're expanding into new markets. So that is almost naturally that you will be seeing different fuels now that are doing more things than just electricity.
I'm putting on my hat if I were on city council, and I'm hearing all of this, and I'm just wondering, is there any worry about obsolescence, right? In terms of, we seem to be expanding the number of fuel fabrication forms that are possible. Let's just believe for a second that they're not all going to reach commercial liftoff. So do you run into any, or how do you future-proof your fuel fabrication facility? Anyone?
The fuel fabrication.
All right, I'll take that one, I guess. How do you foolproof it? Okay, so when Monica put up the way the supply chain is broken out, somebody in my position looks at it with a bias, of course, that the material we dig out of the ground, the ore, is vanilla. We then convert it to UF6. It's vanilla. We then enrich it, same way, just a different concentration of vanilla. When you get to the next level, that's when we take it in, and we kind of do, I guess I would say we do the ugly part of the process. We'll take it and make it from UF6 into UO2, U308, UO2F2. We'll go into U metal. We're going to go into triso. We'll go in any direction. So that's what we do. That's what we started our DNA with, is an ability to do that. So we attract the chemical engineers, we attract the PhDs, and we work with the developers, because at the end of the day, that's not my job. If Everett says, I want it to look like this, and I promised all my customers it's going to do this and that, I say, okay, how would you like me to make it? And then we will make it that way. So we're comfortable as a fuel fabricator that as long as there's volume, right? If you make an investment, you just can't build overcapacity, because we've done overcapacity in the past, and as a result, all of us have shrunk for the last 2 decades, and shrinking's hard. You lay people off, you close down plants, you ruin communities. That's the exact opposite of what we want to do, is build overcapacity. We want to systematically, slowly move. Now, Mike Goff said 2 words that I absolutely love and believe needs to happen, and that is order book. In case anybody's not sure what that means, is just like in cool internet space, if you get pre-orders, then you go ahead and you make the stuff, right? If people commit to ordering something, then we will commit to building infrastructure, and we'll build that infrastructure based on that set of orders. If everybody shies away and everybody waits for the next guy to go first, then we hesitate. So what the DOE is doing, in my opinion, that is absolutely incredible for the first time, is the funding they got from Congress and the ability to put out requests for proposals for enrichment and for deconversion is they're catalyzing us. They're saying, I'm going to cover that risk. Get started. They will come. And we're going to get started. And we just can't overbuild. So how do we protect? We make sure we don't go too fast. We go systematic. We wait for the demand. Do we care about how many flavors of ice cream? Not really, because that's our wheelhouse. That's our job. It just has to be logical, because if one guy orders every 5 years, his price is probably going to be higher than the guy who orders, 6 times, 10 times a year. And we currently make 600 to 700 tons of material a year. This market is in the 25-ton range, maybe 30-ton. What do you say, Everett?
It's going to start there. It'll grow rapidly depending on what happens with nuclear deployments.
It'll grow systematically.
Exactly.
Not rapidly.
Well,
rapidly and systematically. How's that?
There you go. I like that.
Well, I just want to say, Bob, you couldn't have introduced the next panel better, because that's exactly what we're talking about. I wrote down an order book as well, but please join me in thanking this panel for talking about nuclear fuels. If we could bring the next panel on up. Also, at the same time, I'm going to introduce them as we're going forward. So Chad Kramer, who's going to lead us off, is from McKinsey & Company. Dave McCormick, who is local here. He's the CEO of the Clean Energy Supplier Alliance. Myron Kazimarski,